We like to say it a lot around here that oftentimes we equate spiritual maturity based on spiritual knowledge. And Jesus never equated spiritual maturity with spiritual knowledge. He equated maturity with spiritual fruitfulness. And so what we want more than anything else is to help people have a life where they bear much fruit. John 15:8. I love that verse where Jesus says, "It is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, so showing to be my disciples."
Welcome to another episode of the Visionary Discipleship Podcast. My name is Adam Ehrlichman, your host, and we've got just a really good guest with us today, Glenn Underhill. He is at CrossCreek Church in Grapevine, Texas, Colleyville, Texas, right next to Grapevine. And he is the executive pastor of spiritual development there. He also serves on the board of a phenomenal ministry that works with churches all around the country and honestly all around the world. They're international, called DiscipleFIRST. Glenn is originally from San Diego. He attended Howard Payne University in Brownwood, Texas, and Southwestern Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. He has served in full-time ministry for over 25 years. His first love in ministry is disciple making, which is why we have him on this podcast. The simple biblical model that Jesus used to make disciples who make disciples. He has trained churches, pastors, and leaders through the United States and around the world in Jesus' disciple-making model. Glenn and his wife, Dawn, have 4 children. So that's a little bit about Glenn, and I'm very excited because when I have gotten to talk with you, Glenn, and I have gotten to, in our conversations in the past, it's so much more than just conversation about discipleship or this thing or that strategy. There's always just this big heart and passion of vision that undergirds what we discuss. And so that's really why I'm excited to have you on the podcast today. But man, Glenn, how are you doing today?
Well, first of all, thanks, Adam, for having me on this podcast. Super excited. Really, honestly, just really have enjoyed our friendship and getting the opportunity to get to know each other. And yeah, so I'm doing great. I'm great because it's Friday, it's the weekend.
Yep.
And get to spend some time with my family and get to go watch some baseball. I have a son that plays college baseball, so gonna get to go watch some games with him this weekend. So yeah, I am doing really good. And so I'm excited again, like I said, to be hanging out with you for a little bit and talking about one of my favorite things in the world.
Yes.
Disciple making.
Yeah. It's hard whenever, we have someone like you on the show like this because we're both so passionate. It's gonna be hard for one of us to shut up to talk. And I've had to grow in my discipline because I'm just like, oh, that's so good. And I know because the conversations we've had and our friendship and even mentorship that I've received from you, Glenn, like I'm just like, I know this is going to be so helpful for our audience and our listeners. Those of you who are tuning in, you're going to find so much value in what we're going to discuss on the front of visionary discipleship, giving churches, leaders, pastors a vision for discipleship in their church that maybe is small, tiny, or non-existent, and they really need it. And so, Glenn, can you tell us, I gave high level just about who you are and some of your background and bio, but man, just kind of fill in the cracks and tell us who you are.
Yeah. So like you said, I've been in full-time ministry over 25 years. In fact, Adam, hard for me to say this, but 29 years exactly. Which blows my mind. I can't believe I've been able to do this for the last 29 years. But I have served in all kinds of capacities. I was in youth ministry for a long time, for about 10 years. I served as an adult pastor, teaching pastor, executive pastor. So kind of been full spectrum, all kind of working within different levels of leadership in those 29 years. But really, my pride and joy is my family. I've been married now 28 years to my wife, Dawn. We have 4 amazing kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. The 2 boys are the oldest ones, and they're 24, 21, and then I have two daughters who are 18 and 15. So, man, life is full, and I'm in a new season of learning how to parent adult kids. So,
Mm.
just learning and trying to figure all that out, and then just a little bit about my journey and all of this is. About 25 years ago, I was had the privilege of getting to meet a guy by the name of Dan Spader, who at the time was running a ministry called Sun Life, and I was in student ministry. And those conversations with him really changed the trajectory of my ministry, my just me personally, but also just even my ministry trajectories too. And so just uh, really kind of started to embrace this idea of Jesus being the model for my life and ministry. So if people were to say, Glenn, what are you all about? Who are you? I would say my core conviction in life is that Jesus is my model for life and for ministry. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of who I am and what I'm about, and maybe a little bit about what I'm passionate about. So anyway, again, that's just a little bit more about me.
That's great. And yeah, your heartbeat is truly discipleship. Any converse, it's almost impossible. Even if we're small talking, just, whatever, we're driving in the car and I think you're taking me to my son's baseball game from an event that you did and I was at with you and it was like we just couldn't even help ourselves. We were talking discipleship and
The whole
yeah,
time. Yep.
and so, whether that's in your home with your kids or whether that's in the church ministry or whatever, but when we talk about discipleship, it can be such a broad term depending on your background and your understanding
Mhm.
of it, what your ministry
Yep.
context is. So, for the sake of our listeners, can you define discipleship and just talk about why is it so important?
Yeah. So that's really a great question, and I think it's the word discipleship has it's one of these words I think in church that means it's defined so differently from so many different people, right? And I think that it's always a really good idea to try to a good baseline and a good understanding from my perspective. Again, no expert here, just a practitioner. As I look at the lens of discipleship, I think of it as a holistic piece of moving someone from who's irreligious to helping them become a fully trained disciple who makes and multiplies disciples like Jesus. So I see it again as more of a journey than, hey, it's just about these few things or doing this or doing that. But it's more of a holistic piece that really takes someone from point A to point B, from where they are to this preferred destination. I always like to say that Jesus has, and I think that picture, that vision that Jesus has for all of us, is to be a fully trained disciple who is capable of multiplying our lives, replicating our lives, and really igniting a movement of multiplication.
I love that. I love that
In
definition.
fact, Adam, as we're sitting here talking about it, I just, it's to me when I think discipleship, I really think the end of that is that idea of really igniting that movement of multiplying disciples is really at the heart of discipleship. And some would argue, hey, maybe we don't use the word discipleship anymore. Maybe better use of the word is disciple making, but I can go either way really, because at the end of the day, I'm really going to see it as a holistic journey versus just this thing you do after evangelism or nurturing or things. I think those are a part of it, but not the totality.
Sure. Yeah. No, no, absolutely. And that helps a ton because the next question I want to ask you is like as your role as an executive pastor of spiritual development at CrossCreek, there is a whole lot of ministry responsibility that you have with different staff at a large church and a lot of leaders and lay leaders and teachers, volunteers. So, I mean, from birth all the way up to, from crib to coffin, if you will, age
Yep.
group wise.
Yep.
Um, with that idea of discipleship and what that looks like and that definition you just gave us and the importance, what does your role, personally look like for discipleship in the church? And, beyond that, I got a follow-up question. Just curious what you think that could look like in some other context. But yeah, what's that look like for you?
Yeah. So, really my my overall responsibility is to really try to help close the gap between our mission and it being executed upon. So we have a mission here at CrossCreek that says we want to lead every generation to know and to follow Jesus. So my 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 total responsibility is really to help narrow that gap of execution from kids, students, adults, making sure that we're aligned towards that mission and that the things that we're doing, the money that we're spending, the activities and the things that we're engaged in are really helping to see that mission come to fruition and to make sure that we're also lined into we have a spiritual pathway we call it here at CrossCreek, and making sure that that's all lined up and moving in a great direction. Um, I also get the opportunity to lead a lot of high impact teams. Coaching. Obviously, I have several direct reports, so that's part of my greatest joy is the coaching and development of those guys. And helping them be a disciple and be a disciple maker on a life level, but also then how does that translate into them leading out being a disciple making leader?
Mm.
We talk all the time on my team about this idea that when you really look at the life of Jesus, really two things emerge out of his life is that he was a disciple maker. So he was making disciples at a personal life level, but he was also a disciple making leader. In other words, he was igniting a movement, leading out a movement that and raising up a team that would then, when he would ascend back to the Father, they were going to continue to execute on that. And so, that's what we talk a lot about here is this idea of helping to coach them at being a disciple as a personal person, and then how can we execute that as a disciple making leader? And then really driving several core initiatives that we do on a on a on a on a basis. Right now, we're on a here at CrossCreek. We have a lot to do with church planting, and so we have a church planting network that we're utilizing and planting churches. And so I was just sharing with you before we got started. I just have been back from one of those hubs that we have in West Africa, working with a group of strategic leaders and doing some strategic planning with them and doing some training as they're beginning to launch that disciple making hub there. And so that was exciting and it's fun to see and just joy to be around lots of emerging church planters that we have there. And then also another initiative we have is what we call this thing called the tip of the spear. This is kind of a new initiative, and we're trying to think about how do we really help sharpen our proven multipliers, the people in our body who really are living as a disciple maker, and then how do we continue to fan the flame in them and keep them hot-hearted and moving forward so that the mission doesn't die. So I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense. So if you were just to say, hey, I make vision actionable, I lead these high impact teams, I drive core initiatives, and really try to keep our team in alignment along the way.
Yeah, yeah. And so you are truly immersed into, discipleship in so many spaces, the spiritual pathway you're talking about for people who come and join your church or who are looking at joining, help them
Yep.
move, take those next steps in their spiritual journey, following Jesus. Also with the coaching and the development of high impact teams, staff, church planting network, tip of the spear, international. You have your hand in so many different places. And really, the things that you said, those are so visionary in discipleship, and that most churches aspire to those things, and you guys are actually doing them.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll just say this: I'm a firm believer in like values, and that, at some point they begin as aspirational, but you really want to create these values that really are who you really are. And it's been fun over the years that as we've been here at CrossCreek for a long time, we've just been working on these pieces, and it's not something that like I say, we always tell people all the time and I also, because I travel and train and consult with churches across the country, and we tell them all the time, look, we're not experts at this at any way, shape, or form, but we are practitioners. And and whether our people feel this way or not, I always say, hey, we're just a laboratory. Our church has really been a
Mm,
laboratory.
yeah.
And just learning as we've been looking at the life of Jesus and taking principles and practices that he was utilizing, and then beginning to implement those here at the church, and learning how to work through all of that. So yeah, it has been a lot of fun, and I think we are. I think we're not definitely not perfect. We definitely don't have it completely all figured out or all together, but what I like to say is we're swinging for the fence, and really trying to see this idea of the Great Commission, to be fulfilled in our lifetime.
Certainly. Yeah, there's a couple different types of churches I tend to run into across the country. And one is a church like you, which is very rare, that you guys are not just aspiring, but you are executing the things that the Lord's given you a vision for in discipleship in a way that most would go, I don't know that we could ever do this. Is that almost on the border of crazy? Like, to think that we could do something like that, and you guys are doing it. And then there's the people who aspire to do some of those crazy, awesome things. And then there's those who they just don't even know what they don't know. And some of them just,
Right.
man, they just need to have that shell cracked open to see the light of there is a possibility to do this. But there was one thing that you spoke to. I kind of want to dive into a little bit more, if it's okay with you.
Yeah.
You had mentioned about your spiritual pathway and the alignment of your staff and what that looks like, from kids, students, young adult ministries, and right. And I mean, you guys have a large church. There's several thousand people, I think up to 4,000 people or so that belong and call CrossCreek their home. A lot of souls to steward. And so, for you and working with all those different team members within your staff team, what are some of the benefits of having that alignment that they have there? What is some of the things that at an execution practical level are you doing to help maintain some of that alignment so that you actualize that vision for discipleship you guys have?
Yeah, so I think one of the plus sides is it keeps us really focused on a few things, and doing those few things and executing on those things really, really well. Um, and it helps to sideline things that maybe aren't as important, and helps us to stay really focused on a few things. And so I think that pathway is very helpful, because it one of the ways that we are able to really stay focused in alignment is by really making sure that our events and our programming, the things that our staff are doing, line up to that pathway, based on each of their individual departments. And so, what we probably do at least twice a year, very thorough evaluation, program evaluation, and asking how are the activities and the programming and the things that we're doing helping people go from from untrained, irreligious, to becoming a fully trained disciple. Can we see people moving through that process? Can we name names? Can we can how is this particular event or program? What is its main primary objective? Is it in within our pathway, and is it really accomplishing? And if it's not, does it need to be retooled, or do we just need to get rid of it altogether? So I that to me is awesome, because then this pathway really helps us think about things a lot more strategically, it forces us to think about is it transferable, and is it simple and easy for people to know? Because as we're having conversations and people are asking, why are we not doing this anymore? Why are we can take them back to the pathway and say, hey, this isn't about us or about you. This is just really about us helping everybody within our church go from point A to this preferred destination. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but that's kind of how that's why I love the spiritual pathway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, certainly. And like with misalignment in some of those ministries that, right, obviously if you're working on creating alignment, that means that there must be some pre-existing misalignments. Hey, we got to get everything, and
Yep.
I know you guys are a well-oiled machine, and so those are probably things in the past that you've had to work through or build towards and create that synergy. Man, what are some of like the cons or the downsides of, hey, we have this misalignment, and so like what was some of the maybe not so good fruit that you were seeing when they weren't aligned in that?
Yeah. So, sometimes when you have misalignment, it's easy for people to get focused on what I would call uh, non-essential things.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
Non-essential employee, you
I
do
can
not come in
quickly
for COVID.
right, right, exactly. And or we begin to sometimes I can tell when something's misaligned when people take ownership of it in such a way that, hey, this is mine and you can't change it or do away with it or whatever, because this is what we have always done, right? And so that's always a good indication that we may have something that might be out of alignment. And and unfortunately, that happens even in our church. And I think that's why we've come back to this idea that we have to do a really these these evaluations on a regular basis, because we have found that as as sometimes can be the case, if you keep doing it and doing it, it becomes over time, it can lock in as tradition, and we can forget why we're doing it in the first place. I always, when we're consulting with churches, I always ask the question, about this idea of Sunday school, right? And Sunday school is very different today than it was when it was originally started. Sunday school back when it was really conceived was this idea that we were gonna reach underpoverished children who couldn't read or
Yeah.
write, and we were going to use the Bible to teach them how to read and write and use it as a means of presenting the gospel and seeing their lives changed. Now, that is very different from the way Sunday school is today. And that's just because as over time, as you keep doing something over and over, it's easy to lose sight of what we first started out to do. And so that might be a terrible example, but I do think that misalignment happens. You have to be ready for it, and you have to be listening for it and looking for it. And then when you see it, you know, go to task on helping to make sure you can really uh, uh, get that fixed
Mm.
quickly.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that you guys are working hard to do ministry, and you don't just want to do hard work, but you want to do smart work. You want to work synergistically,
Mm.
not in competition but in a way that's complementary, and it sounds like in some ways too, even collaboratively, with looking and reevaluating back to what you said earlier with your events and your programs. Like, are these helping achieve the purpose of what you guys laid out in the mission, or is it pulling away from maybe something that you had that should be more primary and helping them move down the pathway of spiritual maturity, right? And so, you spend a lot of time in other churches, not just yours, traveling all over and doing consulting and speaking at different conferences, Glenn, and working with different conventions, even state conventions, to, with local associational leaders as well, and so in speaking into that, there's a lot of different things that you get to see. What are some of the weak spots that you see in discipleship in local churches today?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I see most often is that discipleship is a more about a classroom and more about information than it is about uh, this idea of transformation, lifestyle, and that we the we often as leaders, because we want so badly for our church um, to grow and to and I maybe this be a bad way to say this, but to maybe even look successful. So we try, any a number of things inside these kind of what I like to call these kind of bags of tricks and pull them out and hope that in the end what it will produce is something that will look like a disciple or discipleship and it will change everything. And what we have found in our experience is that it takes you got to think of this as the long game, and that transformation takes time, but it also takes not only does it take time, but it takes intentionality. It takes relational equity, and it really has to be a very missional focus, uh, where where there really is we're driving this thing is driving towards the ultimate fulfillment of making and multiplying disciples like Jesus. So I think that's what often happens is we just think, hey, if we just do these certain things, then things are gonna might just happen by accident, when in fact one of the things we like to say all the time is that if you really look at Jesus, what you'll discover in his life is that he was incredibly relational. He was relationally driven, life on life. He was intentional. He had a process, a strategy of moving people through this journey, so that they could become a multiplying disciple. But then he was very missional in its focus. So it wasn't just a cul-de-sac, and we aren't just doing things for the purpose of doing things, but it really had this end in mind. I know you do a lot with groups, and man, we think groups are one of the primary vehicles for helping people to become a moving them along becoming a fully trained disciple. But so often, Adam, one of the things we have figured out as we're working with churches is that sometimes the end becomes community.
Mm.
Hey, we just need biblical community. If we have biblical community, then all this stuff will, and we're like saying, hey, community or groups aren't an end, they are a means to the end. And they are a helpful piece, a tool. Again, we talk about, when you're programming or events or things like that, those are just how we structure relationships in order to help people move from where they are to where they need to be.
Yes. Yeah, I cannot tell you how much I also see that people make groups all about, um, hey, get saved, get into a seat, open your Bible and study. And it's not just seat and study, but it's serve and share, right? The gospel and share your faith
Mm-hmm.
and live that out. And I think I think you see this with Jesus' model, right? And this is what I think you guys do a lot of with Disciple First and consulting churches and doing trainings and speaking. And I know you guys do this at your church, is that Jesus' model was not just to learn knowledge, but it was I think their biggest places of growth happened when he activated them into service, right? When he,
Yeah. Yeah, we like to say it a lot around here that oftentimes we equate spiritual maturity based on spiritual knowledge. And Jesus never equated spiritual maturity with spiritual knowledge. He equated maturity with spiritual fruitfulness. And so what we want more than anything else is to help people have a life where they bear much fruit. John 15:8. I love that verse where Jesus says, "It is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, so showing to be my disciples."
amen. We could just wrap it up right there, Glenn. That's phenomenal. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, the distinction that spiritual maturity does not equal spiritual knowledge. It's a part of it, but that does not it's not equivalent.
It is. Yes.
Um, but the
No.
maturity, spiritual maturity is equivalent with spiritual fruitfulness, and that's what Jesus did. Yeah, man, that is good. That's definitely going out as a quote with a tag and a cool image on my social media later today. So they're gonna go. They're
Well, I'm glad I could help them.
yeah. Got to feed the social media, man. Got to feed the algorithm. Gotta keep up.
Gotta feed the beast, baby.
You
Feed the
do, you
beast.
do. It bites back. We don't need that. So, uh,
Yeah.
let me
No.
ask you this, right? Because the title of this podcast, it's
Yeah.
the Visionary Discipleship Podcast. What is
Mhm.
one way a church leader can be more visionary in their approach to discipleship? Like if you're just going to bust open the lid on their, leadership or their discipleship vision, what's one way church leaders could be more visionary in their approach to discipleship?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to where I started, and I think that's this idea of beginning to develop a a core conviction that Jesus is the model for life and for ministry. If Jesus is the one that commanded us to make disciples, would it not first and foremost be imperative that we understood what a biblical disciple is? We find that most churches across the country, Adam, aren't even really clear on what a disciple is. So,
Wow.
like, they have some unclarity on discipleship. Well, they don't even have clarity on what a disciple is. So, if we're commanded as a church to make a disciple, wouldn't it be important to know what a disciple is? But then I think the other side of that is then how do we go about that? And so if I could, say what's the one visionary thing you could do is really begin to look at the life of Jesus through the gospels. And what you'll see is that Jesus, because I think what we often do is we study it, we read the gospels and we're very um, impacted by his message, and so we should be. But Jesus also had very there's a lot to see in those gospels about his methods and about his
Mm.
model. And I think if I could encourage pastors and leaders and thinkers in that area is begin to look at the gospels and see them as a see the pattern that Jesus did and how can we extract those things out of because if he's the best disciple maker that has ever lived and disciple making leader that ever lived, and I think that he is, would it not make sense to take those same principles and extract them and begin to look for modern ways and modern expressions of how we can begin to implement those in our churches today?
Yes. Yeah, taking just this ancient truth and that is still applicable today and still is powerful for today and leveraging that which has been preserved for us for over 2,000 years in the New Testament scriptures. I mean, right, it's amazing. Like, hey, it's right here. It's right here in front of us. And taking that, developing that deep conviction, leaning into, and you've used this language a lot too, of being yielded to the Spirit. That's a big phrase for you guys at CrossCreek and even for you personally that has impacted me as well. And so truly having that conviction yielded to the Spirit to be led to,
Mhm.
right, to replicate what Jesus did there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't wanna do a shameless plug, please forgive me, but, Disciple First just launched a resource called His Way Still Works, and it really looks at this, at 36 key life and ministry events in the life of Jesus with the idea of helping you to begin to develop this philosophy of ministry that says Jesus' way is still the way to make and multiply disciples like Jesus and begin to really start to harness these convictions. We talk about 7 core convictions as it relates to disciple making through the life of Jesus. I and there are other tools I'm happy to share. I mean, Sun Life has a tool called Knowing Him that's an just an amazing resource as well. But I just think it's important. Go back to Jesus. If I could, it doesn't sound very visionary, but it is visionary because Jesus had a vision, and I believe that vision is to see a movement of multiplication And we can be a part of that. We can play a part of that. But I think, unfortunately, the church in North America has gotten a bit off course from that. That's what I love about the Great Commission. That it talks about, hey, go and make disciples of all nations. But then there's this promise at the end where it says, I'll be with you always to the very end of the age. And I wonder if the reason the churches in North America are beginning to see a deficit and aren't as healthy and productive in really changing, being a part of being a change agent. Could it be that we've stopped short of making disciples the way Jesus really wanted it? And we've kind of bought into other models and things that maybe aren't what Jesus had in mind at the end of the day. I have a good friend that always says, Jesus started the church the way he wanted it, and now he wants it the way he started it. So just something to think on. And I just really challenge people to think at that level of maybe going back and looking at Jesus a little bit differently through fresh set of eyes.
Yes, that the vision that someone may need for their ministry might not be looking up and beyond, whatever this big, awesome thing it might be just looking down into the pages of Scripture, and where
Yep.
all the power of all this that we discuss truly comes from in the Holy Spirit. And so, just to wrap things up, Glenn, could you give us, right, because all this is for a reason. It's ultimately leading to change, to progress, to life transformation, as you said. And is there a
Yeah.
story that you can think of or remember witnessing a person's life transformed, whether it was with you personally or just something in, your ministry of oversight of someone that you saw in a group or some type of area like that?
Boy, man, I could share a lot of stories, but one I think that, well, there's two specifically, but one right now, so there is a guy on our staff. He serves on our executive leadership team, and we now get to serve together, which is really fun. But when I first met him, he was a young executive working in the marketplace, um, kind of doing the church thing. Came because it's what his family was doing. Uh, didn't have a whole lot of direction in terms. I mean, he had definitely put his trust and his faith in the work and the person of Jesus Christ, but just kind of not really going anywhere. He always likes to say he was very spiritually
Mm.
stalled. And by God's goodness, he brought the two of us together into a friendship, and over time, I had the opportunity to begin to disciple him, and he began to travel with me. As I traveled, he'd go with me and he'd watch what we were doing. And I was investing in him and pouring my life into him, and I was trying to help him have teaching him how to walk with God and how to have a real heart for people who are far from God, and then how to have a real plan to invest in others and be a proven multiplier. And slowly I began to also see that he had a lot of leadership skills and giftedness. And so we began, as he was moving along the spiritual pathway and God was doing great things, we began to move him up the spiritual or up the leadership pipeline, and began to give him more opportunities to lead and more opportunities to serve the church because of his giftedness and leadership. And it was just fun to watch him actually really having a huge spiritual impact. Well, God began to continue to work in his heart, and I could begin to see that God was actually really starting to maybe move him away from the marketplace and really giving him a call to vocational ministry. And so when I stepped away from the role that I was in, we were able to ask Zach to step back in and to step into that role. And so then now over the last 8 years, because of, again, as he's continued to be a disciple and make disciples, but he's also been, a very gifted leader. I wish I even had a tenth of his leadership skills. He has been able to really help bring some really great leadership to our church, and now sits on our executive leadership team on our pastoral level. So it's just fun, right? I get to do life with him now every day because we're doing ministry and we have a friendship and been watching him. But I also get to see all the guys that he's invested in and know that, hey, we share a lot of common points because we have a same spiritual tree together. It's been phenomenal to watch that. And then yesterday, I actually had lunch with a guy that 10 years ago basically told me in no uncertain words, "Hey, I'm not religious. Don't ever push religion down my throat because I know you're a pastor." And watched that friendship over these last 10 years come to a place where he just recently crossed the line and put his trust and his faith in the work and the person of Jesus Christ. And we were having lunch yesterday, and we were reminiscing about his story and what God's doing in his story and in his life and in his family. And asking me, "Hey, he said, "I'm just not quite ready. I don't know for baptism. There's a lot there. I wish I could unpack it all." But he said, I'm really close. I'm really, really, really close. And would you be willing to do that when I'm ready? And I don't know. There's something. It was so just refreshing to see how God has, because the journey for some people is rather quick. Sometimes the journey is a little bit
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
But it's fun to see these lives being transformed by the work and the power of Jesus. And man, they're going to be they're going to be world changers. And I would not trade any of that in, because that's what I hope my life will be. Is that not where I served, what I did in terms of with these organizations I've worked for, but really can stand in heaven and begin to see how God allowed me to play a small part in a movement of others, and see this fruitful tree of multiplication.
The Who has been
The Who.
impacted. Yeah, not the band, but actual Who.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I like the band too, but
there you go. That's a win-win right there. That's both. So
yes.
I love that, and all the matters that we discuss, and discipleship and process, and biblically speaking, and even the models that are put before us that we can take and replicate and use and move to see the Holy Spirit blow wind into the sails of a movement that so supersedes our abilities, our capacities, and a lot of times our own vision, and grow our faith and stretch it even more. All of it is for what you just gave us an example for right there, Glenn. Just stories of life change, transformation, and the progress that we see the gospel has in people that no one ever thought would happen otherwise. So that is all that we have got time for today on this episode. Glenn, thank you so much for coming on, giving your time today to just shed some light into this, share wisdom, and just phenomenal. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and again, thanks for thinking about me, and I value your friendship as well, Adam.
Yes, completely. Now, Glenn, if some of our listeners, audience, if they wanted to learn more about you, what you guys do, Disciple First, and some of your other ministries, and the consulting that you do, where could they go? Like, what do they need to know about you to be able to connect with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So super easy. Just go to disciplefirst.com. www.disciplefirst.com. That it's our website for our organization, and pretty user friendly, and you can look on there, and or you can even get on our website here at CrossCreekChurch.com, CrossCreekChurch.com, and kind of find your way to my stuff that's on the link. But either two of those are really super easy to use, and would be a quick way to get a hold of us at any point in time.
Great. And listeners, audience, those here, we are going to have that information in the episode description. We're going to have the links, and we'll put Glenn's email in there. We'll put his phone number and his social security number in there for anyone who needs all those things too. No,
Hey, it's all worth it if we're going to talk about disciple making movement. So, yeah, no, you can do all that if that's the case.
there you go. There you go. You can drain his bank account and any Social Security as long as discipleship happens. And see,
That's
I
right.
didn't lie on the front end. I said this is a guy immersed in it, and I mean, we will just talk, and love it, and it is just insightful. It's innovative. It is profound. And so, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to listen to another episode with the Visionary Discipleship Podcast. My name is Adam, your host. I hope that this started or spurred on some good thought trails for you. Maybe didn't answer all your questions, but we are happy to help you go down some paths to open up some doors to see further than maybe you've ever seen before in discipleship. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.